Hey guys, and welcome to Aussie Reviews. Well, today what I'm going to do is talk to you about the Australian gun laws. The reason I'm doing this is there's just so much myth on the internet about what the Australian gun laws are. I mean, there's people overseas that think that guns are banned here, and you see, especially you guys who are watching from the US and Canada, there's a lot of talk from the anti-gun lobbies over there that the Australian gun laws are the best and they work and all the rest of it. Well, this video isn't going to actually go into the pros and the cons for the Australian gun laws. It's simply going to explain to you how they are and what's the requirements, okay? Now, to start off with, here in Australia, the gun laws came into effect, I guess, really quite strongly in 1996 as a result of the Port Arthur massacre. Now, the main things that were affected there were semi-auto rifles, pump shotguns and semi-auto shotguns. There was also universal requirements for registration and licensing of people to have a firearm here in Australia. Now then, a bit later on in 2001, we had the Monash University shooting, which was done with a handgun. Now, as a result of that, there was restrictions brought in on handguns. We already had some restrictions prior to that, but there were further restrictions brought in for handguns from there, and I'll explain that in a moment. So as a result of that, what we're left with in layman's terms is we're left with licensing. So if you have a firearm, you want to have a firearm here in Australia, you must be licensed for it. You must provide a genuine reason for it. You must have safe storage for it. And you also have to have completed a safety course to have that firearm. Okay, categories of weapons. Each weapon or firearm is listed or categorized in certain categories under the legislation, okay? So you have category A, B, C, D, E, H, M and R. Now that's for Queensland, my state where I am. You will find a slight variance of what they class their categories as in different states, but however that's the basis of it all, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. With the licensing here, to give you an example so that you understand it in simplistic terms, say for example I want to get myself a bolt action rifle to participate in some target shooting at my local range. What I have to do is I have to go and sit a safety course for that particular category, and then I have to get that, also get a copy of my membership to prove that I'm a member of an accredited range, send that along with the safety course, along with a fee naturally, into the state or territory police department, in particular the weapons licensing branch or firearms registry branch of the police department. Okay, and that goes in with the application for the license. What will happen then is usually it's about a 2-month turnaround before you get issued a license, and then that license will come out for whatever genuine reason you've put in and for that category of weapon. So for example, if I put something in for sports or target use, I'll have a firearms license come out, and the reason or the code on that license will be for sports or target use. Now if I want to actually acquire a firearm, okay, now I've got a license, you have to apply for what's called a permit to acquire. So there's another fee with that. Here in Queensland it's approximately $33 to get a permit to acquire at the time of making this video. Now what you have to do is you have to pay for that, you have to apply for the permit to acquire. If it's your first firearm, then there's a minimum of a 28-day waiting period on top of the waiting period it took to get your license. So once that actually comes out to you, it'll come out to you in the mail. You then have to take that permit to acquire along with your license into a licensed gun dealer, and then you can actually purchase a firearm and take that firearm away from the dealership with you. If you've got a friend and they want to sell you their firearm, a bit similar. Both of you have to go into the dealer, and the dealer has to broker the transaction, which is an additional fee for, and then on top of that you still need to have a permit to acquire from the weapons licensing department to acquire that weapon. Okay, so there's fees everywhere you go with this. Now, once you've actually got that, you can only use it for the stated reason on your license. Okay, so for example, if you've got on your license a weapon or firearm and it's for, say, target shooting, you can't then turn around and use that firearm for security work or for collection purposes. Okay, you have to have a license for that genuine reason for that category of weapon you're going for, if that makes sense. Now the categories of weapons, okay, you've got several categories that they've all been basically just subcategories and organised into. Now Category A, we'll start with that one. That's air rifles, okay, so that's semi-auto air rifles. It's single shot air rifles. If it's an air rifle, it's in Category A because they even require registration and licensing here in Australia. Also, you've got Category A rimfire rifles, which are basically all your rimfire rifles unless they're semi-auto or full auto. Okay, so pump action, lever action, bolt action, toggle action rimfire rifles are all Category A. Then you've got your shotguns that basically aren't semi-auto or full auto. They're Category A. So in other words, you've got lever action shotguns, you've got single barrel, double barrel, triple barrel shotguns. They're all Category A. Now to get a Category A license, it's pretty straightforward, and then to acquire a Category A weapon, it's widely available for a whole heap of genuine reasons. Now I'll add in this part here, self-defense isn't a genuine reason for a private citizen to acquire a weapon here in Australia, okay? Now, I'm not going to get into that argument here, but I'm just letting you know. Okay, now your genuine reasons for Category A weapons. So you can have sports or recreational use, okay? The difference between sports target or recreational use is obviously sports and target is at an accredited range where you're actually shooting at targets or engaging in competitions. Recreational use here in Australia is classed as if you've just got the firearm and you're out on some rural land and you're either hunting or you put up a can or something like that and just have some recreational fun with the firearm. You can also obtain a Category A weapon if you're a primary producer, so in other words a farmer, and you basically using it to control pests. You can also be a feral pest controller like myself, who actually gets paid to go onto rural properties and control feral pests. Also, collectors can have a Category A weapon. Collectors' licenses are also very popular here in Australia. Naturally, if you're a firearms instructor or a dealer or an armourer, you can also have a Category A weapon. It's fairly easy to obtain because it's the most least restrictive. Then we go up to Category B weapons. Now, Category B weapons are centerfire rifles that aren't full automatic or semi-automatic. Now, Category B rifles such as like lever actions, pump actions and bolt actions are all fairly easily obtained, and also the same as with Category A, available for a whole heap of genuine reasons. So you can have it for sports recreational shooting, you can have it for collection, you can have it for primary production, feral pest control, dealers, armourers, firearm instructors can all have them. Okay, so they're not really restrictive or restricted, I should say, here in Australia. Then we go up to Category C weapons, and this is when you start to see some restrictions come in. Category C weapons are semi-auto rimfires, that's rifles, up to 10 round mag capacity, okay? So any semi-auto rimfire up to 10 round mag capacity is a Category C weapon, provided it's a rifle. We're not talking about pistols yet. Then you also have semi-auto and pump shotguns up to 5 round capacity. They're Category C weapons as well. Now, what you'll find for genuine reasons to obtain these Category C weapons is you can't have them for recreational or sports target use, okay? There is one exception to that, and you can obtain like a semi-auto shotgun on a Cat C license for clay target shooting, so in other words a sports target license, provided you've got a medical reason and your arms, you don't have any upper strength to break open the action of a shotgun, or you had that pre-96 and you're a member of an accredited clay target club. Okay, so there's a slight exemption there, but that's still limited because you can't load any more than 2 rounds at a time into that semi-auto shotgun, okay? And that's Category C for clay target shooting. Now, normally Category C, as I say, is pump and semi-auto shotguns up to 5 rounds and semi-auto rimfires up to 10 rounds. You can have these as the collector, okay? There's no problem there. Dealers, armourers naturally, and also firearm instructors, you can have them on there. Primary producers can have them, and this is probably one of the most common Cat C licenses you'll see here in Australia, because a lot of the time a farmer will have a pump shotgun or a semi-auto shotgun to control feral pests on his land. With feral pest control, I can also have the Category C weapons to do that. But where there's restrictions, there's a couple more restrictions that I should really tell you about here. If you've got a Category C license for feral pest control, Okay, you're restricted to shires, council shires, of where you can actually use those firearms. And that's usually predetermined on where you've got shooting contracts, okay? So for example, hypothetically, say I've got, for example, a contract to shoot out at Esk, a small township outside Brisbane. Now I'll have Esk Shire on my licence in part of the conditions of where I can use Category C weapons. Bit similar for primary producers, okay? They have if they've got a Category C licence, they're restricted even more to use of that firearm only on the land where they do the farming, okay? So for example, whatever their address is of the farm, that's the only place that they can use that firearm. They can't, for example, go to their neighbour's property and start using it there legally. And the same with feral pest control. Unless you've got that shire on your licence to use, you can't then use it outside that shire. Okay, you then have to submit an application to have that shire added with an applicable shooting contract. I won't go into that too much more because it starts to get a little bit technical, but that's just to give you a rundown there. The other thing about Category C too is you can't actually share the firearms in regards to, like, say for example you're a collector and you've got a Category C shotgun on your collector's license. You can't then give that to a primary producer to be able to use in primary production, okay, because that firearm is registered for collection purposes only. So in other words, even the collector, they then can't take that shotgun and then go out and do some recreational shooting or some hunting with it, because that's not what the license is for. They've got a collector's license for the purpose of collection only. So look, I'm not going to get into the fors and against with it. As I say, I'm just trying to give you a no BS approach on it, and you can make up your own mind about it all. Then when we go, before I go up, I'll just add too, security guards can also have Category C licenses, because one of the things that you'll find very common is like a Remington 870 pump shotgun under a Category C license for security guards. Now that doesn't mean that a security guard working for a company can then take that home and then engage in, like clay target shooting or recreational shooting or anything like that. They have to leave that at their work, okay? Unless you're registered as a security business yourself, that's the only time that you'll be able to have that Category C firearm in your possession, other than when you're actually engaged in the duty that you're doing as a security guard. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Alright, so moving up to Category D. Now this is fairly heavily restricted Category D. We're talking about your semi-automatic centerfire rifles. Okay, not full auto, just semi-automatic. Mini 14s, AR-15s, all this sort of stuff you'll see available there for primary production, also feral pest control, hence the reason why you saw my review when I did the AR-15. Okay, it's because I have it for feral pest control. So I can't just go out to a sports club and start using that for sports shooting, okay? I can only use it for feral pest control. Other people that can have Category D weapons are collectors, but they're restricted even more because they can't have anything that's operable, okay, as a Cat D weapon. So in other words, if they see like an M1 Garand collectible that they'd like to get a hold of, they actually have to permanently deactivate that firearm, which obviously is going to lose the value of it. But like I say, that's just the law and the way it is. So they're going to have basically a permanently deactivated hunk of steel and wood, okay, as their Cat D weapon, which still needs to be securely stored. I'll explain the secure storage a little bit later. Okay, so obviously you've got dealers, you've got armourers, you've got security can't have Category D weapons, you've got collectors, you've got primary producers, and like feral pest controllers that can have Category D weapons, okay? This is where the myth of you can't have semi-auto rifles in Australia comes from, because they're talking about Category D weapons. The only truth to that is that if you're a sports or a recreational shooter, you can't have them for that. However, they're not banned. You can still apply for them, but you must have an occupational requirement or a collection requirement to have them. Okay, then from Category D we go up to Category E. Now Category E are ballistic vests, okay, so bulletproof vests as people like to call them. They're an actual weapon here in Australia, and you have to have a license to have one, and you have to get a permit to acquire and everything else for it. It doesn't include ballistic helmets here in Queensland anyway, and I've confirmed that. Ballistic helmets are not a Category E weapon. However, if you want a ballistic vest, you can get them on a security guard license. That's probably the most common thing you'll find, other than collectors, that'll actually have category E weapons here. So once again, explaining the uses for it. Say for example a security guard has a ballistic vest for work as a security guard. That means that he or she can't just put it on to go down to the shops and do the shopping. Okay, they must be engaged in the actual duty of their job. Okay, going up from category E, we've got category H, which is for handguns. This is very, very popular here in Australia. Thousands of shooters enjoy sports or target shooting with handguns. You can get obviously handguns on a sports or target shooting license, or that is your genuine reason. You can't use handguns here in Australia for recreational shooting, okay? So in other words, you can't just use them out on a property to shoot at some targets or to hunt with, okay? That's prohibited here. Category H licenses for sports shooting is fairly restricted in the sense of you have magazine capacities of 10 rounds, okay? That's the limit. Also, barrel restrictions. If you've got a semi-auto handgun for sports shooting here in Australia, the barrel must be a minimum of 120 millimeters. If you've got a revolver or a single shot pistol for sports shooting here, the barrel must be a minimum of 100 millimeters. Okay, so there's a few restrictions there. Also, you're restricted for sports shooting for category H use here in Australia to calibers. Okay, you can't have anything over 38 caliber. Alright, so anything over 357 you can't have. Air pistols, they've got to be registered. That's all under category H as well. Rimfire pistols and your centerfire pistols, whether it's a revolver, a single shot, or obviously a semi-auto. It's all category H. Now there's a little exception to that. If you've actually got an accreditation or an endorsement, I should say, on your license to participate in an accredited event, you can have over 38 caliber. So in other words, you can have a 40 cal or a 44 Magnum or a 45 cal handgun. Okay, you can't have anything over that 45 cal. Now an accredited event is actually metallic silhouette competition or single action matches. So that means that you can get that endorsement for sports shooting to use that higher caliber, but you can only use it on the range in those competitions. You can't then use them in other competitions that aren't accredited. Also too, if you've got a category H license for sports shooting here, say for example you've got like a Ruger Mark III 22 pistol. Okay, you have to do a minimum of 6 competition shoots to keep that firearm and keep that license. Okay, so that means going out to an approved range and engaging 6 times a year minimum in actual competitions to keep that. As I said earlier, you can't have a firearm for self-defense here in Australia, so your category H firearms are out. Now, category H, this is where it becomes a little bit confusing. All those restrictions I talk about mag restrictions, barrel restrictions, and also participation restrictions and caliber restrictions, none of that is applicable if you've got a collector's license or you've got a license for category H for primary production or feral pest control, or naturally if you're a dealer, a firearms instructor or an armourer. Also, security guards can have a category H license here in Australia. Okay, usually you'll find that with the security guards that do the money transport. Now, with regards to that, they don't have any restrictions with magazine capacity or barrel lengths. Okay, but they do have certain caliber restrictions and type of ammo restrictions, I believe. Okay, so going up from category H, we then go to category M for miscellaneous. Now this license is usually issued for crossbows here in Australia. Now they also include a lot of your flick knives, butterfly knives, ballistic knives, knuckle dusters, that sort of stuff. All that requires licensing and registration here in Australia. So usually with your category M license, the most you'll ever see people have them for is collectors, I should say. So for collections in particular, and also for sports, target, recreational use with a crossbow. Okay, so you don't see too many of those licenses getting around. Then when you go up from category M, the next one you go up to is category R. Now category R is probably the most restricted. The only people you'll ever see with a category R license usually is collectors. Category R is for anything chambered in 50 BMG. tasers, a lot of anti-personnel military ordnance, that sort of stuff. Obviously collectors can have all that, but once again, all that stuff has to be permanently deactivated for a collector to legally possess it. Okay, so obviously if there's a bazooka that a collector wants from World War II or something like that, then that's fine, they can have that, but they have to go through the process of getting a permit to acquire, having it permanently deactivated, and then obviously securing it, or storing it securely, I should say. So on that topic about the storage, there's various different storage requirements. I won't go into every bit of detail, but I'll give you a basic rundown. If you have a firearm here in Australia or a weapon of any of those categories, it must be securely stored when you're not using it, okay? So that means you can't have firearms just lying under the bed. You can't have a firearm just sitting up on the wall on display or anything like that, okay? You have to have secure storage. Now, for example, let's take the most common thing, the sports and recreational shooters, okay? If you've got a Category A or a Category B license, you need to have a safe that weighs up to 150 kilo, made of either wood or steel, permanently bolted to the frame of the building, okay? Now, if it's over 150 kilos for Category A and B, then it doesn't need to be bolted, okay, provided it's over 150 kilos. However, if you then go to like Category H handguns, regardless of the weight, doesn't matter, it could weigh 6 ton, it still has to be bolted to the frame of the building, okay? So there's different storage requirements there. Then when you go to Category C and Category D, then obviously there's requirements there, okay? Category D especially, it's got to be a steel safe, you can't have a wooden safe of any description, and it has to be bolted to the frame of the building. Same when you obviously go to Category R for collectors and so forth. Then you've got other storage requirements, like if you've got over 30 firearms, okay, there's requirements there to have like either a vault, and further requirements there, but you don't often see that here in Australia. Naturally, the dealers have their own requirements there with regards to gun racks and all that sort of thing. So I won't go into that too much because it's not really applicable just for the everyday shooter here in Australia. So anyhow, guys, look, what more can I say? It's a very convoluted system, in the sense of there's so many rules and policies and laws in regards to firearm ownership here in Australia, but hopefully I've cleared that up a little bit with how I've tried to explain it. So just to summarise it all, firearms here in Australia definitely aren't banned, they are just restricted, and depending on what genuine reason you have will depend on what firearm category you can actually have on your licence, okay? But you need to have a licence. There's mandatory waiting periods at different times, and there's also a mandatory requirement for all firearms, pistols, shotguns, handguns, even air rifles, to actually be registered and securely stored. You also need to have a permit to acquire to legally buy and acquire any of those firearms. Alright guys, well look, this is pretty much an explanation as best as I can get it, so I hope it's helped you out and you've got something from it. Any questions, just have a look in the links below, because I'm actually going to put in the links to the websites or the government websites here in Queensland with the actual different legislation. So if you want to read up on it a bit more, you can clearly see the requirements there as I've told you. Alright guys, take care, and we'll catch you next time.